There's a whole lot of shame and embarrassment about money anyway. Like, we don't talk about what we're earning with anyone because either we feel we're earning more than them and it's embarrassing, or we're earning less and that's embarrassing, or we're not earning enough, or whatever. We never talk about it. We are not very empowered as women because we're not asking the men around us what they're earning. So pay gap continues. The way I look at money is it just gives you choices. The more you can, if you're in a bad situation, you're unhealthy and you want to leave work, or you just want to leave work because you've had enough, or you want to leave a bad relationship, or where you live, or whatever, you need money. So that's how I think a lot of women approach it. Before you go into a relationship, you've got to have some sort of money conversation with your partner. You've got to know what their ideas are about money and what yours are, and are you compatible on that? Financial advisors will say that fewer of their clients will go through divorce than the national average because they are aligned on things like that, because they do have the money conversations.
What does it take to be a financially empowered woman? And what can financially empowered women do together to change the world? A shocking statistic is that around 400,000 women in Australia are at risk of homelessness. And the cause of this is the lack of education about how to build a financial foundation, starting even before we first enter the workforce and well into our retirement years. My name's Dion Payne, and I'm the founder of the Financially Empowered Women podcast. I'm passionate about ending homelessness, and as part of that passion, I chose to look at the systemic barriers that are causing homelessness for women in the first place. The Financially Empowered Women podcast is designed to bring you the best experts from around the world to increase your financial know-how and give you practical and women-specific tips to overcome the challenges you might be facing, such as how to negotiate a better salary, demystifying super, or how to navigate a separation and ensure the assets are distributed fairly. My role is to provide you with the best information out there to change your trajectory and become a financially empowered woman, because you deserve it, and the world needs you more than ever to own your worth and help others to do the same. Hi everyone, and welcome to the Financially Empowered Women podcast. Today I'm delighted to be here with Julia Newbould. Now let me tell you a little bit about Julia. So Julia's worked as a journalist and editor since graduating with an economics degree from the University of Sydney. Julia started working in the financial services in 1999 and has worked with financial planners and super funds for most of that time. Welcome, Julia.
Thank you very much, Dion. Great to be here.
Yes. Now, I know that there's a little bit more to what you do. So would you like to tell us how you got into this field in the first place and what's led you to this point?
I guess what's led me to this point, what got me into financial journalism in the first place, was the idea that a lot of people had blinkered opinions when it came to finance. They thought, I don't understand it, I can't do it, I can't write about it. And so there were jobs in that space. So that's what got me into it. But then getting into it and realising that it's a bit exclusive because of the jargon, it made me want to explain things to make sure that there was equity for people, that they could understand the terms and be part of the environment. And we've all got to play in this world. We all need money. We all need to work on our superannuation and our situations, whether it's, buying a home, having somewhere to live, looking after families, etc.
Yeah, great. So I've got a copy of your last book, The Joy of Money, which you mentioned that you published in 2020 when chaos happened in the world. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
So how that came about was my co-author, Kate McCallum, who is a financial advisor. We used to catch up for lunch every so often and we'd talk about that's where we were working and how people didn't understand about superannuation. Nobody cared. And when were you going to care? And how old did you have to be before you started paying attention? I was working at a financial company and I was in marketing, and we just couldn't connect with people on superannuation. And we knew that, you get your booklet and so on and you throw it out because, it's so far away mostly. And so as we got older and, we were in our 40s and we were thinking, well, now's the time when people are starting to think about it. We knew our friends were thinking about changing their situation, whether it was leaving their jobs that they hated, working fewer hours, leaving partners that they weren't happy with, or moving into areas that they wanted to live in. And it was all about, can I afford it? And when can I afford it? So at that point, people were starting to pay attention to their super and their finances and wondering, if they were on the right track and what other people were doing in similar situations, or at the same age. Were they ahead? Were they behind? How were they going to catch up? Or what were they going to do? So that's what's got us started on that book. And just wanting to not replace financial advice, because there are many cases where you need it. We're not all up on, what the rules are about tax or contributions to super, etc. And so we didn't want to make people feel like they had to learn everything, but we just wanted to give people enough information so that when they did want to seek professional advice, or whether they thought that they needed to seek financial advice, they had some sort of background. And, when we launched in March 2020, obviously that was when we were all going into lockdown. The world was in chaos. I was editing Money magazine at the time, and we just didn't know what people would want to do. And we thought, well, the book's a dud because no one's going to want to know about money at that point. But it was the reverse. Everyone was totally focused on their money and what they had, because they didn't know whether their jobs were going to be there. They didn't know how much they needed to get through this period. What was going to happen to super if they took it out. Everybody was very focused on money at that time. And people were talking about baking bread and so on. Well, I didn't have any time for that because everyone wanted to know more about finance.
That's really cool. So who were the people that were wanting to know more? If you could sort of put them into a category, who were the most people that were seeking out your advice at that time?
Well, I guess the concepts that we write about and everything about money, it's not really gendered, but the way we speak is. And so we directed it at women, and the book, has a feminine cover and so on. The difference in the voice that we use was, well, it's our voice for a start, but it's more about what does money mean to you rather than money as a discrete object that's growing in the corner. Like, we just didn't think women connected with that. So we spoke about it as what you could do, what this means for your future, for your family, etc. We aimed it at women 40 and above because that was our target, that we thought that's when you start paying attention. But we were very surprised. We had a lot of younger women focused as well. And I think that that's carried through. I think younger generations are more focused on money than we were at that age.
Which is fantastic. And in doing this podcast show, I'm always at the back of my mind thinking, what do I need to tell my 15-year-old daughter? Like, how can she start early and avoid the mistakes that I made when I was her age and, sort of first entering the workforce?
Yeah. And I think there's a lot of guilt that goes with money. And I think when you get to a certain age and you think, oh, I've stuffed up there, or I shouldn't have spent that, or I bought too many shoes, or whatever it is, we don't want to pay attention to it. We want to just leave it over there and move on. But we're very firm in that, start today. Like, don't worry about it. Whatever you've done in the past, you've done it. So don't feel the guilt. Don't beat yourself up. Just, pay attention to it now. And one of the pieces of advice are that just own what you have, know what you have, and be on top of it at all times. Not trading shares or necessarily doing anything like that, or playing with your super investments, but just know what you have. Know what you're spending. And, it's very easy now to have multiple subscriptions to, all sorts of things. But, know what you're up for. Each one might not be worth too much, but, we oversubscribe to things, and it's good to have a day every so often where you just go through and clear it all. So it's just keep on top of it at this age.
Yeah, that's really good advice. Actually, just before our interview, I saw a subscription pop up and I was like, oh, I meant to cancel that ages ago.
Yeah. Yeah, we all do that. And the other one I think is, and this is so basic, but it's important, it's spend less than you earn.
Yeah.
Yeah. So know what you're earning and know what you're spending. That's the trap, really. We don't mean to spend more than we earn, but sometimes we're just not paying attention.
I want to talk to you about obviously we're more in a digital currency at the moment in terms of we use our cards all the time. And I just noticed for myself that I really have to be on track with and looking at what I've spent and looking in my bank balance, sort of at the end of the month and going, okay, I've got to be a bit more mindful because it's so easy to wave the card around. And have you got any sort of insights around that, any sort of tips that you could share around that?
Yeah, you're very right on that. It is really difficult to keep track of everything. I guess debit cards are the way to go to make sure that you're not overspending or, I have a lot of different accounts for different things. I have a ticket account for when I want to go to the theatre, and I have an account that I put, extra money I earn that I need to pay tax on, and I have another account for investments and another for holidays and so on. And then for everyday expenses and where wages go in. And I think for me, I sort of play around that this is my expenditure money that I can spend. And when that gets low, I know that I'm starting to overspend. Credit cards are great for a lot of reasons, but you've got to keep on top of them too. And for me, I pay them off every month. So making sure that you're really disciplined on that. If you're not, you shouldn't have a credit card, I think, and I think the buy now, pay later schemes, that can really get difficult too. And especially when you have more than one, you think you haven't really spent much on that one, and then there's another one and so on, and they all, come home to, and it can be years of trouble that you get into if you're not paying off any of your debts. I knew someone who bought furniture for his bedroom when he lived at home with his parents when he was probably 18, 19. And it was one of those buy now, pay later type schemes. And he didn't pay it for a year, and it just racked up an enormous debt that became untenable. And, he sort of hid it from his parents, and this thing just snowballed. And then it affected his borrowing capacity later on and, his credit rating. And it can be really dangerous if you don't keep track of it.
You've brought up a really good point there. So he hid it from his parents. There's probably a lot of shame around that and not really wanting to admit that. And there's a lot around the emotions involved in financial struggles.
Absolutely. And there's a whole lot of shame and embarrassment about money anyway. Like, we don't talk about what we're earning with anyone because either we feel we're earning more than them and it's embarrassing, or we're earning less and that's embarrassing, or we're not earning enough or whatever. We never talk about it. We are not very empowered as women because we're not asking the men around us what they're earning. So, the pay gap continues. And then, getting to the other end of working life when looking at retirement, people don't want to tell anyone else what they've got in their superannuation. So there's this kind of mystery about, well, do you feel, that you can retire soon? What have you got? And that's awkward as well. And then, I know when I hear from friends and they've got a lot more than I do in super, I think, well, gosh, does that mean I've got to work more, or am I behind? And it makes you just feel a bit embarrassed and a bit ashamed, I guess. And I think we need to get rid of that. But how to do that is difficult because, when you're talking about money and all those jealousy things come up as well, that's really difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, what are some of the financial challenges that you have seen women come to you about? What are the most common themes there?
People just don't know about their finances. I talk to friends who just are not in control of their finances, their partners are. And just because one person in a relationship will normally look after the finance, and that's fine. Like, obviously, you're going to separate your tasks at home and so on, but just to not know is kind of dangerous because you're really trusting that the other person really has the knowledge of not just where it is, but whether you're on track and so on. And in relationships, if you're not in agreement on your money and your goals, then your whole relationship suffers, because it's not really just about your money and your goals. It's about your goals and where you see the relationship going and what you see doing as a partnership or a family. And, when one person wants to retire earlier than the other, and how are you going to manage that? I think all these things need to be discussed. I've had other friends who have worked on contracts and so on, and they're earning a lot of money, but they're not on top of, then they've got to pay tax, and then they've got to, account for a lot of other things and they're not on time with that. And tax bills can rack up as well. You don't pay a couple of years of tax and suddenly you pay that plus your penalties and so on. That can really wipe you out. I've seen major struggles with that, where people have had to then sell property. And then there's the opposite as well, where people, I look at them and I think, you're doing okay. You've got this investment property, you've paid off the house, you're earning, you could take your foot off the accelerator a little bit here, but there's the need for someone else to sort of okay it for them, like a financial advisor. So everybody's got their different issues, and there is that embarrassment that people just don't want to ask what they think are stupid questions.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that you mentioned earlier is that financial advice is the same for, both genders, but the language that we use is different. Can you expand on that?
It's just the idea that women that I talk to need the money to be connected to something else. So whether it's sending kids to private schools, or whether it's to know that you can afford a holiday, or live in this kind of home, or have this car, or whatever it is, that's how women think about money. And it's about a big picture. Whereas men can have an account that just sort of builds, and they're looking at that amount and so on. And you can talk about the investments and what you've got it spread into. And that's enough for them. Women, I don't think, can think as much like that. It needs to be a bigger conversation. So I think women don't generally pick up investment books because it's terms that they don't understand in things that they're not particularly interested in. And I know that's, very broad brush and it's generalising, but, there we are.
It's interesting that you say that, because I have felt that for myself. It's like I don't get excited about, the numbers, but I get excited about what I can do with the money. And there's some really key non-negotiables in my life, like where I send my kids to school and my car, for example, are two things where I'm like, okay, well, I've got values around those decisions, and I'm prepared to stick to those values. So whatever it takes, whatever I need to earn to keep those things happening, that's really important to me. But I didn't realize, in terms of what you're saying, I didn't realize that that was a whole thing. I didn't realize that sort of men and women thought differently about that.
Yeah, and I think women are very smart, and I think we're sort of thinking about, what we do all the time, and we're, multitasking, and we're thinking, well, if we have this super and we can retire here, and, if we build it up to this bit more, we can retire earlier, and this will give us this and that will give us that. I think we're always making these decisions and, compromises in our minds of what we can do. So explaining it a bit better, I think, was important to us. And one of the other things that we did in the book was put in a lot of examples of, so-and-so's got this much in super. This is why, they, took time out of the workforce to have kids and so on, and they're doing this, but they've got this other investment and someone else has got this, just to say that we're all different. There's no one size fits all type of situation. It's all different for everyone, and everybody doesn't need the same, and everybody doesn't want the same. And, you've got to sort of let go and be okay with that.
Yeah. Now, look, I'd love to throw a scenario to you, because it was something that a conversation that I've had really recently. A friend of mine has separated from her partner, and there's more that she's owed, in terms of the settlement. But she was thinking, I don't want to go through the drama of going to court and for maybe what is a little bit of a difference. And a perspective that I offered was, what is don't just look at what you can do now, look at what life could look like in the future if you don't have that additional income. And then what would that look like, and what would you have to do, and just get really intentional around that. What's your take on that kind of situation? Because I'm sure you would have seen this a lot. Well,
what you say is very sensible and a good idea, but there's so many factors involved. I've done a bit of research lately on collaborative practices. I don't know if you know a lot about that, where each party in a breakup or a divorce, they have their own lawyers, but they all get together in the room. So it's very transparent of what one person's telling the other person they can get. And so ultimately the hope is that you don't take it to court and you're not spending all those excessive fees on lawyers. And it tends to be a little bit more creative as well. So you might, when it comes to children and how it's going to be structured, there's a bit more opportunity to make it fit your particular situation. But what you say is true. Like, you know, if you give up too easily, and I can understand, you know, there's so many reasons why you might not want to continue fighting. And, you know, the reverse is that you get into a situation and you're sort of arguing so much and spending so much on lawyers that it's moot. But what you say is absolutely correct. If you're not getting enough, and it will cause problems down the track, you know, you've got to make it fair. So you do have to think about, and that's why you get advice, you know, to make sure that this is what you're sacrificing, and have a look and have someone, you know, model it out for the next few years. And that's where I think financial advisors are particularly good at modeling things out. Well, if you do this, this is what the likely scenario is in the future, or if you do it that way, or if you don't put this much in, or, you know, I think that's really helpful. Both, if you're going to be okay, you want to know, and this is big in retirement as well, like people want to know, can I retire? Am I okay? And advisors will say that there's occasions where the people come to them and they're like, of course you're okay. You probably would have been okay 5 years ago. You're fine. But they need someone to say that before they feel the comfort in doing it. And, you know, I feel the same. I'm on my own, and financially, you know, I have to discuss it with myself or an advisor, you know, and I want someone to sort of to say, yeah, you're okay.
Yeah, it's just about having that sanity check, really, isn't it? Like, I do this, but can you have an objective look at this and see if I'm making the right decision here?
Oh, and when I was younger, it was more, oh, I've got this great idea, I want to invest in this. And then they'd be like, no, that's not a good idea.
There were a couple of themes that you mentioned there that I wasn't really aware of, or one at least that I wasn't aware of, but that collaborative approach that you were talking about sounds fantastic, because it does seem that it's the middle ground to capitulating and just going, oh, it's going to be too hard, or toe to toe with the lawyers, and then nobody really gets what they want except the lawyers. They make a mozza. So I really love the fact that you've shared that about the collaborative way of doing things. And my question is there where would somebody find, where would my friend find that?
Yeah, so there are collaborative lawyers around, and you can, you know, Google and find them. They have to be qualified and able to practice in that area. Typically what they would do is you would each find a collaborative law practitioner, and then they would get other people involved as you need you might need a counsellor, you might need an advisor, and so on, and they bring them all in together. Up front, it can be a bit expensive once you're getting everyone together, but it should shorten the process and stop you going to court. But one of the drawbacks is that if both of you aren't interested enough and you're not both committed to it, if the process fails, then you have to start again. Those lawyers can't then go on and do it in another way. So, but it is gaining in popularity when people know about it. It's been going for quite a long time, but people don't know about it. It's been gaining in popularity because it can cut out that court time. But also, I just love the idea that it's transparent. You know that the other person's not getting advice behind closed doors. It's ridiculous. And, you know.
Yeah, that's great. Now, in my work, so I wear a few hats. I have Women for Homes, which is an organisation designed to inspire women to invest in solving homelessness. I also have an organisation called High Impact Property Investments, which is where I raise capital for property developers that are creating affordable, sustainable and inclusive homes. So I kind of, I'm involved in financial matters a lot. And in terms of the circles that I'm in and the networks that I'm in, there's a lot of talk about how capital is not flowing towards women. I think I read about 2% of VC capital last year went to women founders. And I'm assuming that there's something similar that's happening in the financial advice space as well, where there's not as many women in the industry as it's just not an equal distribution. So what are some of the issues that you're seeing in the financial advice industry around women?
So currently there's about 21% of advisors are female. The number's been fairly static for probably as long as I can remember. There are some structural problems which the financial advice bodies are looking to remedy. Some of them, it's difficult when women go on maternity leave, when businesses aren't flexible, when we're not in the majority already, people aren't necessarily all coming together on the issue. The part-time work, it's just not been looked at in terms of professional development. You still need to get the same number of points up whether you've taken time out or not. You still have to pay for training and you still have to pay for your license fees and so on. It becomes expensive for the employer as well. So it has to be a real commitment. Women feel that when they stay in the industry for a long term, a lot of them go and start their own businesses to give themselves that flexibility in hours and so on. It's sort of, you need that number, which is, probably 30, 40% to get real change. And unfortunately, we've just not achieved it. The drawback to society in general because of that is that if the industry isn't reflecting the people they want to serve, then they're not coming. And so that goes for gender, it goes for culture, it goes for age, and it goes for income brackets as well. So, there's a need for the industry to become, more reflective of society. And there aren't enough financial advisors already, and then it's exacerbated by this.
Yeah. I do remember actually a couple of years ago, there was a change in the rules or something, and quite a lot of financial advisors left.
Yeah, the education standards. It was quite interesting because before they came in, I thought, oh, well, this will be good for women because we don't go into an industry or an area that we're not, 100% qualified in. So there'll be no women losing their jobs because of this. But the new standards did mean that if you were in the middle of, if you were going to be studying and so on, it made it a lot more difficult. And a lot of women were in a situation where they were in, their 30s and it was childbearing time and so on. And to do that extra study, it was an extra commitment. So it didn't really pan out the way I thought it might. It also, unfortunately, when the Royal Commission happened and a lot of the banks, all the banks got out of financial advice, it was a lot of the women who left the industry. They were more junior members of staff. They didn't have as big books of clients. Other planning firms didn't want to buy them up and so on, and it just made it quite difficult for them. And the lack of stability in the industry just frightened a lot of women, and they went and did something else.
Yeah. That reminds me actually of, I studied, so I did a PhD back in the day, and I always thought that academia was a sure path to, sort of career stability. And I remember one of my supervisors who had worked in Harvard and like all these really prestigious universities all over the world. We had a Women in Science Day, and she said, that she had all of these credentials, but because she'd moved around a lot, she didn't have a lot of super. So she was in her 70s. She had a condition. She was going to have to keep working. And I'm so glad that we had that day. And I'm so glad that for me, the blinkers fell off because I was at that age as well where I was thinking about child rearing. And I remember trying a couple of times to get a postdoctoral position. It didn't pan out. And I was like, called up my husband. I was like, right, we're going to have kids now. So he knew that was coming, but probably a little bit earlier than he thought. But I'd say all that to say that, when it becomes a decision about childbearing or, sort of taking an extra study when you've already got children, it does make it really difficult. And so the industries that we think are stable are not necessarily that way. And then what we're seeing is that older women, such as my supervisor, are just not able to retire at the time that they want to or actually need to because they don't have that superannuation stability.
Yeah. And that's the difficulty. And the way I look at money is it just gives you choices. The more you have, the more choices you have. And, if you're in a bad situation and you really, you're unhealthy and you want to leave work, or you just want to leave work because you've had enough, or you want to leave a bad relationship or where you live or whatever, you need money. So that's how and I think a lot of women approach it.
So what advice would you give to women to be more confident in taking control of their finances?
I think, a few things. I think you've got to build up some sort of investment for the future, because things won't always be the same. And even with retirement, a lot of people don't retire at the time of their choice. People are forced out of work or, ill health or whatever reason. There's statistics that say a lot of women give up work, in their 50s because of menopausal symptoms, etc. So I think there's always a need to put something aside. And I think some in super, but some also outside. You've got to have the ability to enact choices. So, I think you need to build up the security bucket of, 3 months' wages. So you've got that choice. I think you need to have some sort of thought to passive income at some point, whether that's before or after retirement. And I think you need to be conscious of spending. So I don't think there's a need to deprive yourself. Like if something is meaningful to you and you enjoy it and it's why you work and so on, don't give it up. But there's a lot of just by-the-by spending that we do that we don't really care about, that if we think about, we can do without. So, people say give up a coffee in the morning. Well, I don't want to do that. I enjoy my coffee and I won't remember anyone's name if I don't have the coffee in the morning. But, I think if you're eating out too much at restaurants that aren't giving you pleasure, or you just, going out to have drinks with, to whinge about your work situation with your colleagues, is that really bringing you pleasure? Like, just think about what you're doing.
Yeah, good point. Now, your book, The Joy of Money, I know has a sequel coming out. I'm curious, though, why did you title the name of your book The Joy of Money in the first place?
Well, there was that other book that came out, probably when we were young, called The Joy of Sex. We thought that would sort of ring bells to people of a certain age. And we thought, it should bring you joy, because so many people get, that negative reaction when you want to talk about money. And we wanted to flip that and say, well, actually, that shouldn't be how you look at it.
Yeah, great. Now, tell us a little bit about your upcoming book, The Joy of Money and Relationships.
So most of us have some sort of relationship with, partners, family, kids, parents, etc. And there's just a lot of ways of dealing with it that we think are important and what can go wrong, etc. Before you go into a relationship, we think it's important. You've got to have some sort of money conversation with your partner. You've got to know what their ideas are about money and what yours are, and are you compatible on that, wavelength. And when you start to look at what you want in the future and what you want your relationship based on, well, a lot of it comes down to affordability and, compromises and what you're going to compromise in terms of where you live, what you earn, etc. And it's all money related. So we're sort of saying you've just got to keep on top of it all. And financial advisors will say that fewer of their clients will go through divorce than the national average because they are aligned on things like that. Because they do have the money conversations and they might not even be total money conversations, but it kind of comes into it because how are we going to go on that holiday, or, when can we afford to get a pool, or can we afford private schools, and etc. If you're not connected and working towards it together, there are going to be problems in the relationship. And then the other side is, whether it's you or your partner who's in charge of the money, just be aware of what's going on, where it is. Don't get into a situation where you find out years later that, you've signed some extra mortgage, or, your partner's been a gambler, or there's been money siphoned off. Just kind of know, what you're up to. And, if you're running your own businesses and so on, you've got to be on top of what the other person's doing.
Yeah, that's really great advice. Thank you, Julia. Now, for anybody that wants to learn more about what you're doing, hear more about the new book, how can they get in touch with you?
Well, one of the things you raised a bit earlier was about, the numbers of financial advisors, and we don't have enough. And so I'm building up a network which used to be run by BT, and then it's had certain iterations, called the Stellar Network, which is designed to get more women into financial planning and to join with other professionals, etc. So I'm working on that website at the moment and the group that's on LinkedIn. But if anyone wants to contact me, I'm on LinkedIn, and also you can email me at julia@thestellarnetwork.com.
Fantastic. And I will put your email and your LinkedIn profile on the show notes. So it's been a real pleasure to have you as a guest, Julia. Thank you so much. And good luck with the Stellar Network, because it sounds like it is really needed.
Thank you so much, and lovely to talk to you today.
Likewise. Great.